Hey guys, this is Adam Parker Bailey. It's been a while since I've done a video. Took a brief hiatus and decided to start making some more videos. Just real briefly, just to answer a few questions about these videos. I do these videos for myself. I'm not doing these videos for anyone in particular. I don't care if anyone watches them. I'm just doing it because it helps me. Helps me get through the day. So I'm going to do this video on ancient history. It's a topic that I think is absolutely fascinating, and I've been very interested in it for a long time. And there's a lot of mysteries surrounding our history, especially the further back you go. I'm going to go over a few brief things here, different artifacts, monuments, things around the planet, and talk about how the official version of history that they're trying to feed us just does not simply fit the evidence. Okay, let's get started. First, I'm going to talk about just a few maps that have been discovered. In particular, the Piris Map. This map was found in the Imperial Archives of Constantinople in 1929. It was drawn in 1513 by a Turkish admiral named Piris. Apparently, it had just been sitting in the Imperial Archives for that entire time. But when they actually got a hold of this map and examined it, they realized that it's a little bit different than most maps of the time period because it shows North and South America extremely accurately. It shows parts of Africa, parts of Europe, but it also shows Antarctica, which was allegedly not discovered until 1820. So how is Antarctica being depicted on a map drawn in 1513? And apparently, according to the notes that were written by this Turkish admiral, Piris, he was at the Imperial Archives of Constantinople, and he loved cartography, and he had copied this particular map off an even more ancient map that was rumored to be in the possession of Christopher Columbus when he sailed to North America. A lot of really strange things about this map, and it's not the only one. You have the Orontius Phineas map, the Bausch map, the Franco-Rosselli map, the Mercator map. All of these maps have something strange about them, showing longitude and latitude lines that hadn't been discovered since late 1700s about. One in particular shows Antarctica as it is depicted without ice, which is astounding. How is it possible that they could have mapped out Antarctica without any ice covering it? In fact, it depicts two continents for Antarctica, and for the longest time, everyone just assumed that it was a mistake until they actually did ground penetrating radar and discovered that it is two continents with an ice sheet that's covering it. I mean, time period, we're talking minimum 10,000 years ago for that ice sheet to have melted and somebody to be around to actually chart that map. But I mean, that's a very, I mean, it's probably much older than that. I mean, thousands of years. Who was around at that time to map out Antarctica that we supposedly didn't discover until 1820? It makes no sense. Check out these maps. I'm not going to go over all of them. They all have interesting things about them. But I'm going to move on to some artifacts that have been found over the years. There have been thousands of artifacts that have been found that just don't fit with the normal version of history that archaeologists are trying to feed us. And it blows my mind that so many of these things can be found and that they still stick so dogmatically to their belief system. And let's go over a few of these. So, the Aztec earplugs. These objects are tiny objects, tiny, 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 that were found in South America, in the remnants of the Aztec civilization. And these objects are made of obsidian, which is a very brittle substance, and it's very hard to work with. What's amazing is that they're less than a millimeter thick. They're cylindrical, small, cylindrical. They call them earplugs, but nobody knows what they're for. But the idea that the Aztecs could have made these objects with the tools that archaeologists claim the Aztecs had, it's impossible. There's no way that they could do it. They're perfectly symmetrical. They're perfectly identical to each other. They're tiny, and the more fine you work with the obsidian, the more brittle it becomes, the more it chips away. So to make these perfect objects so tiny is impossible with the material that they had at that time, with the tools that they had at that time. Now, upon closer examination, we actually do find evidence of machining on these objects, which just, of course, further compounds the mystery. I'll move on. There have been a large number of items that have been found encased in coal. Coal, of course, takes hundreds of thousands of years to form under the earth through heat and pressure and in 1851, Scientific American reported that in Massachusetts they found a metal vase that was encased in a lump of coal that was 15 feet down under the earth and was estimated to be about 100,000 years old. What civilization was around 100,000 years ago working with metallurgy and was able to make a metal vase? No, doesn't fit. There also there was a gold necklace that was found in 1891 by a woman who had broken open this piece of coal and discovered a gold necklace inside the coal. Several scientists and archaeologists had tried to disregard her and say that she had just simply dropped the gold necklace into the coal, but there were clearly pieces of coal that were still embedded into the necklace, and a very distinct imprint of the necklace in the coal, clearly showing that it had been there for hundreds of thousands of years. A gold necklace, hundreds of thousands of years old. I'm going to talk about the Ica stones briefly, because it's a very long story, but there was a series of stones that were found near Ica, Peru, in South America, by a farmer who was simply out searching around the area, and he came upon these stones, and he started gathering them up and bringing them back to Ica to sell. And there were hundreds of these stones of varying sizes, from softball sized up to boulder size. And on these stones are depicted very strange things. Lots of dinosaurs and people interacting together. It's depicting a civilization that was very advanced in medical technology, had a lot of really strange sexual practices and sexual rituals, um, had knowledge of the stars and astronomy. There was a doctor, his name was Dr. Cabrera, that noticed these stones and started talking to the farmer that found them. And apparently, what had happened was the farmer was arrested and took it into custody. And a couple days after, he got out. And then he started saying that he made the stones himself and that he didn't find them and that he had carved them. Um, so Dr. Cabrera was examining these stones and he found a fossil on one of these stones, carved into one of these stones. And the farmer was illiterate. So Dr. Cabrera thought it was highly unlikely that an illiterate farmer would have knowledge of this ancient fossil and be able to depict it so clearly on this ancient stone. So Dr. Cabrera started buying a lot of these stones from this farmer. Um, and After a while, Dr. Cabrera was concerned that he might have been duped by this farmer into buying all these stones. And then he realized, he did a little quick calculation, and realized that the stones, the amount of stones that there were, and how long it takes to actually carve them, there's no way that the farmer could have done it. There's no way. There's not enough time in his life to have carved all of these stones. A couple of the stones were examined, and what's interesting is that they discovered that there were some stones had a patina on it that went into the grooves of the carvings, which would indicate that the carvings themselves were just as old as not just as old as the rock, but very old, and not recently done. And some of the rocks that they examined had no patina growth on the carvings. So it's likely that once these stones started becoming popular, individuals that would want to keep this information secret decided to start making their own and try to mix them in with the other stones and get the whole thing confused. It's a very interesting story, and I think you should definitely look more into it. But I'm going to move on. There was found between 1991 and 1993 in the Ural Mountains in Russia, they found a series of small objects that they referred to as nanotechnology, the smallest of which was 1/10,000th of an inch. These objects were dated between 20 and 318,000 years old. A lot of them have very complex shapes, spirals. They're made of complex metals like tungsten and molybdenum. Very strange. No explanation who made them, how they got there, why there's this 300,000 years ago. That's insane. Also in the Koso mountain range, they found a spark plug in a chunk of rock. It was about 500,000 years old. It's a spark plug. Not like it looks like a spark plug, it's a spark plug. Near London, Texas, they found a hammer. Actually, they found a series of tools, but I believe the hammer in particular was the one that survived. And this hammer is embedded in a rock that was dated about 300 million years old. How could a hammer get encased inside of a rock that's 300 million years old. The hammer itself has a lot of strange properties to it too. Like it shows signs that it under the handle, the wooden handle, underwent petrification and being turned into coal at seemingly at the same time, which is unheard of. They're two completely different processes. In addition to that, though, the hammerhead is made of extremely pure iron, rust-free iron, which is nearly impossible to do. We can't do it. We don't know how to do it. Metallurgists don't know how to do it. The only other time that we've ever found rust-free iron was from one of the rocks that came back from the lunar landings. So how somebody could have been around that long ago to make this hammer and how they made it, it's a complete mystery. Nobody has any idea. Now there's also in Glen Rose, Texas, there's an area called the Dinosaur Plateau that is famous for having a lot of dinosaur fossils. And there are a series of dinosaur footprints that are fossilized into the sediment. And right alongside them are human footprints that are also fossilized, which takes millions of years to happen, right alongside the dinosaur tracks. And this, obviously caused a huge uproar in the archaeological community and has since their discovery. A lot of the creationists are trying to use this as evidence that the Earth is actually 6,000 years old, which I would not agree with, and that humans and dinosaurs at one point interacted with each other, which I do agree with. So right off the bat, archaeologists said, well, these things are carved. They're fake. They're not real. There's no way that there's fossilized human footprints right alongside these dinosaur footprints. So the archaeologists, particularly the creationists, started doing some more scientific work and removed more layers of sediment and found more footprints along the line of footprints that they had found underneath years and years and years of sediment. And then they took one of these footprints and they cut it out and then cut it in half and then x-rayed it, and they showed that the footprint was made by depression. So it wasn't carved. There's no way it could have been carved to make that kind of depression. When the footprint was made, the mud was shifted, the foot stepped down onto the mud, made the print, and it's not a carved fossil. So then an archaeologist came up with a theory that these seemingly human footprints were in fact dinosaur footprints that had eroded to look exactly anatomically correct human footprints. And he won an award for this theory. And it was a big thing. Well, so the other archaeologists went back and did some more discovery and found one of these fossils of a human footprint that was overlaid on top of a dinosaur footprint, clearly destroying that guy's whole erosion theory. And so the individual was, the archaeologist that made this discovery was giving a lecture about it, and the man that won the award for the erosion theory happened to be in the crowd listening to this lecture. And he left the lecture, got on a plane, flew to Texas, went to Glen Rose to the Dinosaur Plateau, and took a metal bar and bashed in that one fossil that was discovered that ruined his theory. That is how dogmatic. I mean, that's completely unscientific. How dare you call yourself a scientist? I mean, if the whole point of science is to never be wrong, then it's not scientific. Anyway, so In that same area, they also found a fossilized human handprint. So you would think that it would give more credence to the whole fossilized human footprint theory if they also find a handprint, but, if it doesn't fit with our already established theory of evolution, then it just doesn't work. Also, there's been many discoveries of Neolithic skulls with evidence of trepanning done to them. For those of you that are unfamiliar with what trepanning is a very complex brain surgery where they cut out a piece of the skull, and then usually to relieve pressure or things like that, or maybe to fix a head injury, and then replaced it with a metal plate. And then it's extremely complex brain surgery, not easy to do, yet we find Neolithic skulls that have evidence of trepanning done to them. There's also one skull in particular that was found in Armenia that was about 4,000 years old, so not quite as old. But this particular skull showed that the individual had suffered a serious head injury, and a piece of the skull was cut out, and a piece of animal bone that was carved extremely precisely to fit exactly into that spot was what replaced the piece of skull that was cut out. And the bones grafted together, and so the individual clearly lived on the rest of his life. This is an extremely complex surgery for a civilization that has no knowledge of anesthetics or hygiene. I mean, it makes no sense. There's also a petrified human skull that was found in Pennsylvania in an anthracite vein. That was dated about 300 million years ago, which is Carboniferous, just about time period. I mean, that's how. And it's not just like it looks like a human skull. No, it's a human skull. They found other body parts too that were petrified with it. 300 million years ago. So there might be some issues with that whole evolution theory. There's also found a fossilized shoe print. This is a very interesting find. This was found in Utah, and the individual that made this footprint, or the shoe print, I should say, stepped on a trilobite, as fate would have it, and the two got fossilized together. So the shoe print on top of the squished trilobite got fossilized. Trilobites, of course, are extinct. They're hundreds of millions of years old. And in fact, you can even see evidence of stitching that was done to the shoe on a 300 million year old fossil. So, humans 300 million years ago walking around with shoes. That doesn't fit the theory. I'm going to talk about the Drapa stones. The Drapa stones are another topic that's very big but very interesting. I highly encourage you to do your own research on this particular topic. The Drapa stones were found in between Tibet and China around 1938, and they were discovered in this cave system. And initially, the team had discovered a series of bodies that were buried in this cave. The bodies were very strange. They had large heads, spindly bodies, short, no taller than 4 or 5 feet. Very strange looking creatures. And so they were theorizing that these were a new species of primate that had not been discovered yet. But then upon further excavation, they found a series of stones, circular stones with grooves on them in a spiral pattern. And they had no idea what these things were. They were several of them. I don't remember exactly how many, but they gathered them up, and it was discovered that there was actual um, depictions on the grooves, the spiral grooves on these stones, and several attempts were made to translate them, and eventually it was successful. And it on these stones it depicts um, it tells a story of these creatures that came from another star system and crash landed here and were stuck here and didn't have the technology to fix their ship and get back home, and they were peaceful, but the local tribes were afraid of them and started attacking them until eventually a peace was established. And actually, even in the cave too, there was a carving of a star system and like a little path that they supposedly took to get to planet Earth. Um, Very strange. And if you still go to that region today, there is a people there called the Drapa, and they look very strange. They have kind of yellowish skin. They're very short. Um, you know, very strange troglodyte-looking people. That who knows? Maybe they interbred with these Drapa people that came from the stars. I mean, I don't know, but definitely do more research on that because it's a very interesting story. Um, There was found a fossilized human finger, codename DM93-083, for anyone that cares to look it up. Um, it was dated to about 100 million years old, and the scientists were like, man, there's no way. That's not a human finger. There's no way. So they did x-rays and cut into it, and they found, yeah, there's bone in there, there's bone, there's marrow, it's a human finger, and it's fossilized. 100 million years old. Um, um, in Delhi, India, there's an iron pillar that, like the London hammer, is made out of an iron that doesn't rust, which can only be achieved by extremely pure, 96% or more iron, which again, we can't do that. We don't know how to make that. Um, so nobody knows how old these pillars are. I mean, some people may give figures, but nobody knows for sure how old they are. There's several of them apparently, and there's just no explanation of how they're made, why they got there, what they're doing. It's just very strange. Now, to top all this off, as far as the artifacts go, um, over the last several years, and actually is continuing on until today, there are a series of small metallic spheres that have been found in mines in Africa, um, African gold mines. They're still discovering these objects, and they're very small. They're perfectly spherical, extremely precise. Sometimes they might have 1, 2, or 3 lines on them. Sometimes they might have dots on them. Sometimes they're just normal small spheres. But a lot of them have been dated in bedrock that they've dated to 2.8 billion years old. Now that just seems absolutely fucking ridiculous. 2.8 billion years ago, that's I don't. That's I have to admit I'm not a scientist. I have a passion for geology, but I don't necessarily understand it quite as well as a scholar would. And I would like to do some more research onto how they're doing these dating methods for a lot of this stuff, because you can't carbon date it. You can't carbon date rock, and I feel like there's a lot of holes in their dating methods, because if it's like, okay, well, if you have to go down this far into the bedrock, and it could take it takes this much amount of time for that much sediment to build up and for it to fossilize. But how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that maybe some major catastrophe happened and a huge amount of sediment built up in a short amount of time period, and it fossilized very quickly? I mean, again, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't know. I gotta do more research on it. So, so in addition to that, there are of course all the monuments around the world that make no sense. The Great Pyramid, for one. The Great Pyramid is an impossible object. It shouldn't be there. The mathematics and the precision of the construction that was involved in that undertaking it's unfathomable. There's no way we could do it today. We can't do it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. We can't build the Great Pyramid today. How the fuck did they do it? How do they do it? I mean, I could go on and on and on about the Great Pyramid, all the different points of, all the mathematics, the phi ratio, the perfect alignment to true north, the fact that it's an 8-sided pyramid. I mean, I'm gonna just leave that alone. The Great Pyramid. If you believe the official story of the Great Pyramid, then you haven't done any research on it. The Sphinx also. The Sphinx clearly shows striations from water from heavy rainfall, which hasn't been heavy rainfall in Africa for 12,000 years at least, maybe. So again, their dates that they're giving us of 2,500 years old for these monuments it makes no sense, and it stands completely in the face of the evidence, and yet they still try to espouse these ridiculous theories. Now, also Baalbek. Baalbek is an ancient site in Turkey, I think, somewhere in that area. But for the longest time, it was believed to be an ancient Roman site, because there's clearly evidence of Roman habitation and Roman construction at the site. However, at the base of the site, there are stones that are upwards of 1,000 tons in weight, 900 to 1,000 tons. That is absurd. The idea that somebody was advanced enough back then to cut out and carve 1,000-ton stone, lift it up into the air, and then place it onto this fucking monument, that makes absolutely no sense. There's just no way. We couldn't lift that much weight with our largest cranes out in the harbors. We can't do it. So the theory that this was of Roman construction, I feel like goes out the window. I believe that the site was there when the Romans discovered it and they built on top of it, and that's why you see the Roman structures that are there today. But I mean, this is Rome we're talking about. There's no shortage of pride in this civilization, and the idea that they would be able to accomplish such an amazing archaeological feat and then not record it and not say anything about it, I'm not buying that. And then, of course, Göbekli Tepe, which is the hot topic now in the archaeological community. Göbekli Tepe is in Turkey. It was discovered that this site was 12 to 14,000 years old. And the reason they know that is because the builders of this particular monument buried it intentionally. And so we were able to get organic material at the bottom of the site and date it to roughly between 12 and 14,000 years old, which is extremely old. And as far as I know, it is the second oldest ancient megalithic site on record, public record. The site is huge. The they've only excavated, a small percentage of it, and I'm not sure if they even intend to excavate the rest of it. But um, as far as what the site was for, some kind of religious thing, I'm sure. It was interesting because a lot of the carvings uh, bear similar resemblance to the statues carved on Easter Island, which is a completely different part of the planet, and two civilizations that supposedly had no connection with each other. Um, Very strange, interesting site. And so, one interesting theory about how a lot of these ancient sites were built comes from Percy Fawcett. Percy Fawcett was uh, a explorer back in the 1900s, and he was famous for being an absolute master bushman. Like, if you're going to be out in the wilderness, you wanted this guy on your team because he knew how to get shit done. And he was leading expeditions through South America and the Brazilian jungle. And he ended up disappearing near the Mato Grosso region of Brazil. And in his journals and writings, he talks about a particular leaf that is found in the Amazon rainforest that's got broad, dark red leaves that produces a chemical that can soften solid stone. Apparently, this was first observed when ornithologists were studying a certain species of bird that made its nests in the cliff, on the side of a cliff. And the ornithologists were trying to figure out how these birds did this. And so they watched them for a while, and the birds would fly into the jungle, and they'd come back to the cliff edge with a red leaf in their beak, and they would rub this leaf on the cliff edge in a circular motion and repeat the process over and over again. And it would bore a hole into the solid cliff edge, and then they'd make their nest in there. So that wasn't the first and only story about this particular leaf. There's also several stories about people one in particular was they were on an expedition exploring ancient Mayan ruins, and they came upon a container that had some kind of liquid in it, and they had hired some local peons to carry their stuff for them, and so these explorers took one of these peons and tried to get him to drink it, and the guy, the local, freaked out, and he knocked the thing out of their hands and ran off into the jungle. And they were all laughing. They all thought it was funny. And then they looked over, and the liquid had spilled over onto a rock, and the rock had softened up like clay. And apparently, once this stuff dries, the rock retains its original density. So when you look at the construction at a site like Sacsayhuaman, where you have so many different stones of different sizes and shapes that all fit together perfectly in this kind of puzzle piece formation that makes no sense in terms of carving, because you're carving them all in completely different shapes, but you have to fit them all together. So it would be extremely complex to do. But upon further examination, if this particular stone softening theory is correct, then you can take these stones, just cover it in this liquid and then just mash them together. And when you mash them together, they'll fit together perfectly, and then when they dry, they retain their normal solidity. So that's really interesting, and it's too bad we're fucking destroying the rainforest, because that would be an interesting plant to discover. And okay, so I got a couple more things to talk about. There was discovered in South America, I think near Ecuador, a boulder in, I think 84, that they discovered. It's a huge boulder, and on this boulder is a depiction of the planet with all the continents: North America, South America, Asia, Europe, and it carved onto the outer edge of this boulder. Okay, and this boulder was found with a cache of artifacts in a mine shaft that was dated between 12 and 14,000 years old. And there is a natural quartz line that runs through this giant boulder that converges at 2 points. The first point it converges is actually in South America at the location that the stone was discovered, which just so happens to have the world's purest, healthiest water. And the second place that this natural quartz line converges at, on the other side of this giant boulder, is smack dab over Israel. Right there, smack dab in the Middle East, right there, Israel. The Holy Land. Wonder why it's so holy. And at the point where it converges over Israel, there is an inlay of an eye in this giant boulder. Now, a couple other things that are strange about this boulder is not only does it depict all the continents, but there's 2 continents it depicts on the stone that aren't there anymore. One in the Atlantic and one in the Pacific. Presumably Atlantis, who knows? But what's also interesting is that in this same cache of artifacts, there was roughly 300 artifacts that they found in this particular mine system. They found a stone pyramid that's about this tall. It's a stone pyramid that looks exactly like the pyramid on the back of the $1 bill. The Illuminati, all-seeing eye, whatever. It's got 13 steps. It's got an eye at the top, and the eye that's inlaid at the top of this pyramid is the same eye that's inlaid into the giant boulder that converges over Israel. The eye at the top, the eye that's inlaid at the top of the pyramid actually glows under blacklight, which seems unlikely for them to be able to do in 12,000, 14,000 years ago. But on the obverse side of this object, there is gold inlay depicting the constellation of Orion, again, over and over again, all over the planet. All these ancient sites keep referring to Orion. Why? And there is a series of writing symbols on it that was that had not been decoded for a long time. And finally, the former head of the German Linguistics Association, I forget his name, he passed away. Before he died, though, he could speak fluently, reading, writing, and speaking 40 different languages, which is unbelievable. But he actually translated this writing, and he translated it to say, "The Son of the Creator comes." What does that mean? Who is this creator? Who's his son? Why is he coming to this planet? When is he coming? You know, what's his connection to Orion? What's this pyramid, 14,000-year-old object, doing on the back of the $1 bill? Why is this boulder? How do they know what the planet looked like back then? How do they know where all the continents are? Why are there extra continents in there? Why does this quartz line converge over Israel with an inlay of an eye at the top of the pyramid? I mean, there's a lot of very strange things going on. But I think the bottom line is there is so much evidence that challenges the official theory of evolution, not just in a biological sense, but an archaeological sense as well. And I think that we need to start being honest with ourselves about the mercurial nature of our understanding of our ancient past, because bottom line is we really don't know how old human civilization is. And the Smithsonian Institute in particular has committed egregious acts against the archaeological community, destroying a lot of this evidence that challenges the official theory of evolution. And people see that and they say, well, you know, I could understand that because there's a lot invested. The Smithsonian Institute has been espousing the evolution theory since its inception, basically, and they don't want anything to interfere with that because they've built up an institution around it. If that theory falls apart, Smithsonian falls apart, and this is a very wealthy, very well-established institution. So on that level, yeah, of course, they would want to destroy these artifacts for self-preservation on that level. But there's another level of it, in my personal opinion, that goes even deeper, of individuals that do not want this information out. They don't want you to know where we really come from because it keeps you confused, it keeps you vulnerable, and it keeps you easily manipulated. And that's the name of the game. Power and control. All the way. Alright, guys. Thank you for listening, and hopefully I'll make some new videos soon.